Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And today we're going to have a conversation around reviews. More specifically, reviews in the board game space. Although I'm sure you can pick whatever space you want, and there'd probably be similar conversations to be had. Now, this is hardly the first time I've talked about reviews. I review things all the time, but this is hardly the first time I've talked about the concept of reviews and the struggles and the challenges and the balances. I did a video a long time ago called "Can You Review a Game You've Played Once?" And the short takeaway is I believe you can, but I believe in transparency, and I don't call it a review if I played it once. I call it a first impressions in general. But you can watch that video if you want a longer conversation. I had a video about why negative reviews are less common. Some of that will feature in this as well, but not extensively so, but we'll talk about it. And then the video that's probably most adjacent to this video, the most similar video to this one, is I did a video called Review Drift once upon a time. And it's a very similar conversation. We're going to hit a lot of those same high notes. If you watch that video, this is going to be maybe 50% overlap with that video. And I'll link to all those down below. But this, and the games on the table, these are all games that I'm going to be reviewing in the next 2 or 3 days. And that's part of the conversation. I put out 5 reviews a week. Generally 5. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes a little less. I think I usually have 5. I have 2 on Saturday, 3 on Tuesday. Sometimes it's an unboxing, but then sometimes it's a video on Wednesday. I'd say usually between 4 to 6 reviews go up a week on this channel. And depending on which channel you are, if you're the Dice Tower, you're putting up, 7,000 reviews a week. And if you are, depending on who you might be putting out 1 review every 2 or 3 months. But if you're someone who's reviewing games on a regular basis, if you're a larger channel who's putting out consistent content, then you generally have a lot of reviews entering the conversation. And there are inherent limitations on what an ideal review should be versus what a board game review channel is going to give you. There are strong disagreements and separations, not disagreements, there are strong differences between the ideal board game review and what you will get from a board game channel, including myself in that mix. Very strong differences. You see, here's the ideal review. And I'm going to go through this point by point. I'm going to go through all of it. I'm going to talk about what the ideal review looks like, and then what a, practically speaking, board game content creator review tends to look like. And there's overlaps, there's differences, there's cross-checks. I may or may not reference other channels. I try to be mindful, if any channels I reference, I'm trying to do so respectfully and positively, not anything negative. Again, I'm including myself very strongly in this difference between the ideal review channel and the ideal review and what you'll see from my channel. You see, the ideal review has a whole bunch of things that are going to be part of the ideal board game review. To start with, the person reviewing the game, person or people's reviewing the game. I'll say one thing. Actually, one thing's not even on my bullet points that I had, but one thing that would be part of an ideal review is multiple opinions. Multiple opinions being part of the ideal review, I think, really helps add to a conversation and just gives you as the viewer more opinions. That's something that the Dice Tower is incredibly amazing at. The Dice Tower does a phenomenal job at that. They've drifted more and more heavily towards having multiple voices in every review, and I think it's done a good service. But that's kind of almost a tangential thing. Before we get into multiple opinions, how does one reviewer get to their opinion? The ideal review is ideally played at multiple player counts. And by multiple player counts, I mean all the possible player counts on the box. If a game is a 1 to 6 player game, you should be reviewing it by playing it at every single one of those player counts. You should also be playing it at every single one of those player counts multiple times. And the more possible variation the game can give you, the experience can give you, the more times you should be reviewing. The more variations a game can give you, the more times you should be giving it at each player count in each possible variation to fully see as much of the system as possible. You also should absolutely be playing the game with different groups of people. People can bias your experience of a game. If one person's not having a good time versus another one is having a good time, it can bias you up or down. So if you have someone if you're playing with your best friend and you're just having a good time, you might enjoy the experience more. If you're playing with somebody who's either a stranger or possibly someone who's having a bad day, it can harshen or lessen your enjoyment of the game. And so to accommodate that, you should be playing it at multiple groups. Now, I won't go as far as saying that you should be playing it at every player count and every configuration with multiple groups, but honestly, probably should if we're talking about the ideal review here. The ideal review should be played, the ideal review of a game, that game should be played over a normal time frame. Because I just said you have to review the game at all different possible configurations to be able to talk about the game. But you also shouldn't be powering through it too quickly, because that would burn you out in the experience. If you play a game 15 times in a week-long period so that you can review the game quickly, that is not a normal experience of the game. That does not represent a normal person diving into the game. You might find that you either enjoy the game more or less by diving into it in a non-typical manner. More likely less, because you might walk into it and after 15 plays in a week, you're a little sick of that game, versus had you played those 15 plays across a year-long time frame, that would be more reasonable. Now, I'm not even going to go as far as to suggest that a typical normal frame of 15 plays for some people could be never, but we won't worry about that. Let's just talk about like the plays to be spread out such that you're not powering through things as fast as possible for the sake of covering the game. The ideal reviewer plays a normal amount of games. Again, normal's a little undefined here, but if you have someone who's playing 4 new games a day, or forget 4 new games a day, playing a new game every single day, that means their experience of how they interact with the board game space is going to be different than who they're reviewing games for. They're seeing games so often, so quickly. Maybe that means any number of different things could happen, but one of those things could be that you find yourself less enamored with new games because you've played 17 variations of them, and the person you're reviewing the game for might be more enamored by that game. Or the reverse is true as well. You may find yourself that you see so many things, that you love the space so much in some different ways, that you might find yourself more captivated. It just changes your experience. It means you as the content creator, as the person issuing a review, is a very different way. You engage with the board game hobby in a very different way than the person you're reviewing games for, and that might mean your opinion reflects a different experience. And so again, you're reviewing games for theoretically the wrong type of person. How you got the game in an ideal review, there's no perfect answer. I don't even have that answer. When I say how you got the game, I mean as far as did the publisher send you the game? Did you back the game? Did you buy the game? Did you get it at retail? Did you get it at a discount? Did potentially you part of a network where you were handed the game to review and then you have to hand it back and it's never your game? There's no ideal answer there because every situation there can give different biases. If you paid for the game, then you are emotionally invested in that game, in that opinion, and maybe you need to justify your purchase. If you were sent the game from a publisher, there's a degree of bias involved. If you were handed the game from a network that's going to want the game back, well, you're only borrowing the game. There's no emotional attachment to the game. You should have an emotional attachment because the people you're reviewing games for, they have that emotional attachment. And so again, there's no perfect answers there. No matter what you do as far as how you got the game is going to affect your opinion in some way or another. So I'll just mention that there is no ideal way to get a game. There's just different ways that are all imperfect in different aspects. As far as how far outside your genre you go, that's also one that's very imperfect. And by how far you go outside your genre, I mean as far as being the ideal board game reviewer, should you be reviewing games that you don't like? Or should you be sticking within the genre and the category that you do like? And how far do you drift? So for example, using myself as a baseline, I'm not going to review a war game with chits because it's not my genre. But what about a Euro game that doesn't look as appealing as another Euro game? How far within the genre of would I've bought the game? Is it exactly the same kind? Do I like the designers, like the publisher, the mechanics at play? How far outside do you drift from your perfect biases to review a game? Again, no perfect answers here because you can argue different ways. If you only ever review things that you are the perfect audience for, well then you're priming yourself for purely positive content and you're not really reviewing things, you're just saying, hey, I like chocolate and I had chocolate, look at that, I liked it. And I had more chocolate and I still like chocolate. Versus are there things you branch outside of there to experience or talk about different experiences, because if you like board games and you're reviewing something that's not a board game, is that really helping anyone? So again, there's a kind of no perfect answer there as far as how outside your own genre you go as a content creator. As a person reviewing games, not a content creator. And so the ideal review has all these restrictions at play. Multiple player accounts, different groups, spread over a longer time frame, a normal time frame, so to speak, playing a normal amount of games, how you got the game is imperfect, how far outside your genre is unclear. And that, practically speaking, that does mean that the ideal board game review is going to come out months after the ideal purchase window, and the ideal board game reviewer is probably reviewing 2 to 4 games a month at a maximum. All of these things are true, by the way. These are things I genuinely believe. This is not tongue-in-cheek. This is not said sarcastically. These are things I genuinely believe contribute to the ideal board game review. Oh, there's one more thing, which is complicated, which is the ideal board game reviewer or review should be as equally encompassing of the negative as the positive in order to give you as helpful as things as possible. Which means if you don't like a game, you keep playing it so that you can review it. You don't stop playing it because then you won't review it, and you don't play it twice and then cover it because then you're not giving a full proper opinion. Rather, you should power through those same 15 plays for negative content as well, so that you can be as fair and as even with all the negative content. But again, that means the ideal board game reviewer is putting out the review usually months after the initial window of when people want opinions, and they are doing so at 2 to 4 games a month, of which some of those are hours and hours and hours and hours and hours dedicated towards games they didn't enjoy but had to power through in order to give you the ideal review. Again, none of it sarcastic. Genuinely true. Actual game reviews are different. The more common thing, and when I say actual game reviews, I do believe you will find ideal board game reviews. I believe you will find them, with some caveats, but we'll come to that at the end. Actual game reviews from most channels you're watching, again, including myself, follow a different path. An actual game review for myself, again, I'm only willing to throw myself into this bus. I don't want to throw it under other people, because I think it's true for almost every channel you can possibly think of. Even the ones that you think of as exceptions, I don't think are exceptions. But if you are a board game channel, actual game reviews have significant things that get in the way of the ideal game review. First of all, they reflect opinions based on far more limited plays. And I will note, and so I will say, just because a channel puts out a review a week versus a review a day, doesn't mean that they played the game 17 times. It just means they put out less common content, and there are other conversations at play as far as why it may take longer. But actual game reviews from most channels you see, will reflect an opinion based on limited plays. Limited plays will vary by channel. For myself, the only caveat I give is I guarantee that if I call a game review, I guarantee that it has at least 2 plays. Versus the first impressions will have 1 play, but a review will have at least 2 plays, usually more. Usually I would say 3 to 4 for most things, more for campaign games, but I only guarantee you 2. And if it's negative, it's more likely that it was 2. I'm usually not diving into a game a third time just to validate for you that it's, yes, I didn't like it the first time, I didn't like it the second time, let me keep playing it negatively. So actual game reviews have far more limited plays. They usually don't experience all the player counts. Very often your opinions will be based on playing with the same group. Sometimes you branch out, sometimes you have differences, but very often you will play with the same group as well. There are limited dynamics at play for any individual person, and so like for myself, again, using myself as a baseline here, I try to branch out gameplay experiences to try with different people, but I certainly don't guarantee it, and I'd say maybe half my reviews were with the same people multiple times as opposed to multiple groups. And so they reflect more limited player counts, more limited groups. They tend to be released sooner rather than later. That aspect of spreading out your plays to have a normal playing allotment or whatnot, I mean that when I say it's ideal. But game reviews from most content creators, most board game channels, will have the review sooner rather than later for 2 reasons. One is because that's when people often want an opinion. The new hotness just came out, and so people want to talk about that game. People want to hear about the game. People want to know if they should buy the game. And 2 is selfishly for the channel, because people want those things, people will want to click and watch and see all that stuff, and your review, when it comes out 3 months later, might be a better review, more informed, but people are going to watch it less because they've already watched the reviews from the past prior months. So both for the audience and selfishly for the channel creating those reviews, sooner rather than later is more common. They also come with different biases no matter what you do. Biases left, right, and center no matter what you do. It's up to a review channel to try to be mindful and counter those biases as much as possible, but they are there. Whether you got the game for free, whether you paid for the game, whether you are trying to be intentionally negative because the audience loves negativity and they want to embrace it and talk about it and view you as honest if you trash a game, versus whether you're positive because you just like games or whether you are a curry favorite with a publisher, there are biases at play no matter what you do, and all reviews come with that bias. How you present the content, what your goal of the content is, there are biases there. It's up to you, the person giving their opinion, to be mindful of them. It's up to the audience to decide whether they think your opinions hold weight with them. That's what actual game reviews are. And again, I say actual game reviews, I mean in general for most channels creating coverage, myself included. They are much more limited and they are not nearly as ideal. Now you could find real game reviews, real with a caveat. You can find ideal, I shouldn't say real, you can find ideal game reviews. But you won't find them from content creators, almost never. And this is the part where I am willing to throw every content creator on the bus. I think the ideal game review does exist. But it exists, and closer to ideal game reviews do exist. And I don't think they exist from channels that put out reviews. I think they exist from that person who's on BGG doing a write-up of the hobby he loves, and he does 2 or 3 write-ups, a month, and he puts them out there, and he talks about his experiences with them. It's better. It's not going to have the number of plays you want, and it likely won't cover the degree of negativity you want. Or if it is negative, it's usually based on 1 or 2 plays. The practical reality of things is, I find it hard to believe that you'll find anyone in the board game space who is playing a game more than 3 times max that they don't enjoy just so they can give you a well-informed opinion of how much they don't enjoy it. I find it hard to believe. I could be wrong there. But even if whether you're in this as a reviewer, whether you're in this as somebody who just likes the hobby, I just don't imagine people powering through that many negative plays. And so negative opinions usually will be based on smaller data sets. Would they have fallen in love after the 5th play? Possibly. You'll never really know, and that means almost always negative reviews are not the ideal game review. They're still an opinion. There's still an opinion that's worth knowing about, worth having, but it's not the ideal way to get the opinion because more research should ideally be done, but it's a hard ask to give of somebody. And so ideal reviews, for the most part, or closer to ideal reviews, do exist, but they exist from people who do this far less frequently, and they do it for the love of what they do, and they never try to grow and never do grow in any way, and maybe they're not looking to quote-unquote grow. They might be someone who's just on a forum posting something, or a smaller channel who just puts out one video every 2 to 3 weeks or whatever it is because they just want to talk about games they love. And that's a good thing. Those things are a good thing, and you should find them out, and you should seek them, and you should be very scared of making them grow because that could be a problem. None of this is a problem, by the way. All of this is okay. Everything I'm saying is, I think, just true, and I think it's okay. There's a difference between the ideal game review and what you will see from people who you go to review games on a regular basis. And I think the important thing is just to understand the limitations. To understand the reality of what's happening. I think understanding is everything. I think knowing what a situation is all the difference. If you go to any board game channel expecting an in-depth coverage of, 20 plays under their belt of a game so that they can talk about the game and talk about how you should get it or not, I think you are being unrealistic with your expectations, especially if you want opinions from them on a regular basis. I think you have to understand what you're getting is a limited view. You are getting opinions, and this is where you have to know you have to know the content creators. You have to know who you're watching and whether their opinions align with yours. You have to find out why you're watching. Are you watching a channel because when they talk about the things they like and don't like, are you looking for their opinion, or you just want to hear them say the things and then you'll kind of read into it? They say they don't really like, they don't really like having asymmetric powers, and you're like, that's fine, I love asymmetric powers. You said the game's not balanced enough? I don't care, I just want the asymmetric player powers. Or do you find that when they talk about the fact that they thought the game was a little too dry, a little too mechanical, and the points weren't that high, you're like, that's the kind of game I like. I like games that are drier or more mechanical. Meaning, sometimes you're not there for their opinions, but you're there for what they say. Other times, the fact that their opinion reflects a more limited playset and more limited experience doesn't matter because you found over time that that particular reviewer or channel or whoever aligns with your own tastes. And so yes, that person, let's use me as an example, I don't want to throw people on the bus. Let's say you're like, you know what, yes, it's true. Alex should have played the game 17 times and he played it 4 times, and it is what it is. But I've also noticed that 78% of the time I align, if you've got to 78 as opposed to, a lot of the time that you align with my opinion. If you do, that's a good thing. It doesn't matter how often I play the game or how I got there, it matters that you align with my opinion. And the reverse is true as well. If you find you don't align with my opinion, then it doesn't really matter how I got there. It matters that you don't align with my opinion. So those things are relevant. What you're looking for from a review, what you're looking for from a content creator, how often do you align with the content creator. Those things are helpful things to understand, and understanding the limitations of what it means to be a board game reviewer, and the fact that the experience at play is inherently different than the ideal experience, and the experience at play is inherently different than the normal person's experience when they go out, play a game. And keep in mind, when I say the normal person's experience on average is to go out, to buy a game, and to play that game once over the next 6 months, and then possibly get to it 2 or 3 more times over the next year, and to slowly, eventually play their games bit by bit here and there. Yes, there are people that power through them pretty quickly. Yes, there are people that buy a game and play it 7 times in the first week, but that's not the norm. That's not the average. People in this hobby buy games, and they have games, and they play them infrequently, which means the normal experience would never give you a review in time, if at all, if ever. I think it's just about understanding things. And keep in mind, I'm somebody that when I want to watch a movie, I tend to go to Rotten Tomatoes, and I care about 10% about the critic's opinion, and I care 98% about the audience opinion. I'm not there for the person who's looking to be critical and find ways as to why this was or wasn't a good movie. I don't care. I want to know what the average person experienced, which is why, for all the flack that Board Game Geek scores get, I like the BGG scoring system. I don't think it's perfect, and I'm not saying it's without its flaws, but it does represent a mass of people who are in the same hobby that I am, and giving their opinions. And I don't need to read their whole explanation why, but the aggregate to some degree will give me information. If I know that I like Eurogames, and this Eurogame has a 7.9 on Board Game Geek, there's a decent chance I'll enjoy it. How much I enjoy it, we can find that out, but it is a good vetting system in general for what the average person's experience will be. And you combine general opinions, you combine that with the content creators you watch, and between all that information, you get something. You get a picture. It is an imperfect picture. 100% it is. It is always going to be an imperfect picture. There are no strong takeaways from this video. There's no correction. There's no aspect of this video where it's about trying to give you the ideal review. This is just a conversation about the nature of the fact that when you watch content creators, whether, again, I was going to start listing. I don't want to list people. Just myself. Let's just talk about me. When you watch my videos, or when you watch videos from any Jane Doe, John Doe content creator, understand the limitations of somebody who's putting out reviews more than once or twice a month. The limitations are there. Whether you choose to accept them is up to you. What you choose to take out of them is up to you. But just understand that a review is an opinion from somebody who just likes games, who is trying to in some way convey that opinion, and you have to decide what you're getting out of it. But the ideal game review is very infrequent, and you usually won't find them. And when you do, it'll be from someone who you're not getting more than a handful of opinions from a month. And that's it. That's the conversation. Just a clarification, a PSA about the nature of reviews in the board game space. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And I hope you have a good one.